It always amazes me how I get here on time. I was in Midtown at the dentist appointment with the kids not long ago. Get from Midtown across the bridge to Brooklyn, drop the kids off and get the car, get back, and all in 10 minutes. No. Ready?
So she bookie she and my talk tron real she in the gampadi Sangha shindu miteru argi Drokun namda shinna chuparsho Hiram guru ratnamandala kamninyatayam Sangha jidang zoki jognam Jonchu bardu dakni kyapsuchi Daki chenyen gipe sonam ki Drola panjir sangha drupasho Sangha chidang zoki jognam Jonchu bardu dakni kyapsuchi Daki chenyen gipe sonam ki Drola panjir sangha drupasho Sangha chidang zoki jognam Jonchu bardu dakni kyapsuchi Daki chenyen gipe sonam ki Drola panjir sangha drupasho.
Let's take a moment to try to put our mind in a more relaxed and neutral and disengaged space from our business and activities of the day. So please sit comfortably for a few moments of breathing meditation. Begin with an exhalation, sitting with the spine straight, eyes gently closed, merely so. One exhalation and one inhalation is one round, and just follow your breath, focusing on the sensation at the tips of your nostrils. Keep your mind focused there. If your mind is drawn off to thoughts or other external points of focus, then start over again. Go back to 1 and start over until you can reach 7 without interruption. So begin with an exhalation. Call to mind your idea of a holy being, whatever form appeals to you. Try to think and see them clearly. Think of them and see them clearly. Call them here to you, to join you. And you can bow down, express your gratitude and humility in whatever way is comfortable to you. In your mind, you can offer a prostration or anything you'd like. Ask them for their help and guidance and teaching you and blessing your mind to be filled with holy realizations, understanding. Supplicate them to remain with you throughout this and all lives until you achieve paradise. Think of your own purity and think of your greatest purity of the day today, your highest virtue of body, speech, and mind. Reflect and recall it clearly, replay that, details of that event. Feel very good and happy about it, that you did this, you thought this. Acknowledge yourself. Pat yourself on the back. Allow yourself to feel really good about it. Offer that goodness to the holy being that you may magnify it and intensify it, reach their status. Doing nothing but purity and virtue all the time. Manifesting purity and virtue all the time, everywhere. In your heart, you can ask them to help. You can ask them to help you do that. Reflect upon your darkness and negativity, your greatest harm of the day, towards yourself or another being, a thought or speech or deed. See it clearly again, in detail. Feel some sadness in your heart, some regret. You didn't help this being, you did the opposite. Resolve that tomorrow will be different. You'll behave differently in this regard. Vow to restrain yourself from this again tomorrow. Think of something specific you can do of a positive nature to offset that negative karma and that negative energy. Some antidote. Be specific. Plan to do it. So offer this to the holy being in front of you, this promise, this restraint. And you can see that they're very pleased and feel their joy, presence. So ask them again to guide you and remain with you always. See them happily agree. Become a small, bright, glowing figure of light. Move to the space above your crown and abide there facing forward, adorning you as a crown ornament. So homage to all the holy beings here and everywhere. Thank you for coming. Do you have quizzes? Does anyone need a quiz that doesn't have a quiz? Does anyone want a quiz? Is there anyone who wants a quiz? Is anyone taking a quiz?
Yes.
Yes, okay. You have your quiz, thank you. Everybody done?
You could start.
Giving up? No.
No.
Can finish at the break, perhaps. So we made it through the mind-only school last week. You mostly came back. You recovered. We're going to move on from the mind-only school, thankfully. Any questions before we do, Helen? Everybody's got it. Everybody's perfect. Yeah.
I don't understand the last one. The rat biting and then the poison that you don't.
The main takeaway is this. So we were talking at the end of the last class about the notion that the mind can perceive one thing at a time, right? The mind can only perceive one thing at a time. So if you watch someone's eyes, they're kind of flitting about, going from point to point, right? It's taking in multiple points and then assimilating it into a composite, or into an idea, or into an experience. So, you know, if you're focused on the phone, you can't be focused on yourself, right? If you focus on yourself, you can't be focused on the phone. You can alternate very quickly, obviously. Mind toggles, very fast. It makes it seem like you're perceiving everything simultaneously, right? But in fact, the mind can only hold one thing at a time. So it raises to philosophers and debaters, it raises the question of how do you know who's perceiving, and how do you know that you're there having a perception? How do you know that you had a perception? Because you and the perception can't be there at the same time. If a perception occurs, if a perception of an outer object occurs, perception of yourself is not occurring, right? So it's a kind of a philosophical debate point that they were making, and it becomes an important point in what we're talking about in experiencing ultimate reality, because then they get into, look, how do you know you're experiencing ultimate reality? You can't experience yourself and ultimate reality at the same time. You know, you can't experience deceptive reality and yourself at the same time. So it's kind of, that was the derivation of it, right? And so they had a logical proof of that you could deduce what was going on, and you could talk about what was going on to know that it really happened. And they used the metaphor of the bear in hibernation being bitten. And you know, we talked about eating a cookie, I think it was. But it's simply this, you know, you have the cookie, right? You see it. You see that the cookie, you're there and the cookie's there, right? You say, I'm aware of the cookie approaching my mouth, I'm aware of myself biting, and then I'm aware of the sensation of nice flavor or something in my stomach, and then afterwards I see the bite taken out of the cookie and I see the context, right? And so they were saying that while it's true that you can perceive two things simultaneously, you can deduce what happened validly as a result of putting those things together. Right? And so they used the example of the bear, which was the bear's in hibernation. It gets bitten by a rat while it's in hibernation. It doesn't wake up in the moment, but it wakes up in the spring and says, you know, I have this festering bite on my butt. You know, I must have been bitten by a rabid rat or animal or whatever. And so that's the metaphor that they used to say, you know, I wasn't there when it happened. I wasn't perceiving it when it happened, but I can deduce by the residue that something did happen. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense, but the division into like A, B, C, D, E, like
Do you want to go through it? I don't have it in front of me. Do you want to go through it? Do you have the steps?
No. It was on the homework answer.
I wasn't in class, so sorry I missed it, but it brought to mind the question, I don't know if you had a chance to discuss it. How do we know the bear didn't have a dream-like vision of rat-like, and it wasn't a snake or an internally produced thing, in order to parallel the idea that we can fabricate memory?
So you get into this, I mean, I think, tell me if this is what you're saying, but I think the question that you're asking is, how do we know that it's a valid perception? How do we know that it really happened? How do we know that it's not a dream, or how do we know that it's true? Something like that? Is that what you're asking? I'm not sure if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, basically.
How do we know that it's not a dream within a dream within a dream in this infinite regressive loop, right? Something like that. And we were talking about perceiving dependent origination, which is the highest level of reality one can perceive in this realm, and that perceiving ultimate reality, which is the highest perception that one can have in any realm. Right? So the nature of the perception is that it's an ultimate perception. When one has the perception, it's a valid perception, and one sees definitively that it is a highest reality and there is no higher reality, and that it is true and that it is valid. So it's kind of built into the experience to know that it's real and that it's true, and that there is nothing higher and that it is all accurate. It is possible, obviously, to have a dream, the butterfly dreaming the dream. I forget what the philosophical statement was. I'm not sure if I answered your question, though.
Just trying to correlate the metaphor to say, well, was it a rat, or did the bear think it was a rat because he didn't actually see a rat?
Maybe it was a rattlesnake, right?
Yeah, or maybe he pinched himself on a thorn.
Yeah, maybe it was a thorn. But the metaphor, the point of the metaphor is not that it was a valid perception that the animal that bit him was the rat. The metaphor is about, that's why we use the cookie, the metaphor is about the nature of perception, and given that you can't perceive subject and object simultaneously, you can't perceive yourself and the thing that you're experiencing simultaneously, you can only perceive them one after the other. Mm-hmm. So given that that's the case, how can you put those things together into an accurate perception of you and what's happening to you, as an accurate chronology, you could say, as an accurate series of events. And so that example is about that. As I think about it and understand it, we talked about a cookie, or maybe it was pizza, I don't remember. It's like you go into a pizza parlor, you're in a pizza parlor, you see yourself ordering pizza, you see that the pizza's in your hand, maybe you're looking at the pizza when you bite, maybe you're perceiving yourself when you bite, and then you end up with pizza in your stomach and a hole gone from the slice of pizza, and you look around and you're in the pizza parlor, and you put it all together to accurately deduce, I bit the pizza and I ate the pizza, because all of the pieces which are there allow that accurate deduction to be made. So that's all it was, really.
So is it just saying that ultimate reality or perception of myself is we perceive it through deduction? That's basically what the whole thing.
Well, I would say it a little different. My perception of me is a function of my mind, right? Right. So I can have a direct sensory experience of being poked, right? I can feel that, or I can smell something, or I can think a thought and hear myself thinking the thought, and then the mind is the thing that conceptualizes it into existence, right? Because what is my sense faculty able to perceive? Am I able to perceive, a phone against my hand? Like, is my hand able to perceive a phone?
No, your mind.
My hand is, we're just talking about the physiology. My hand is, it's got some nerve endings, right? It's got some skin, it's got some receptors, which can only feel pressure, temperature, whatever, pain. So there's very limited data which is coming in through the sense faculty, right? But that's not all the data that my mind is getting. Through that sense, all I get is pressure, temperature, shape, whatever it might be, Through visual sense, I get color, size, whatever, And then through the other senses, similarly. And so there is nothing there, really, until my mind assembles all of the inputs and data into the idea of my iPhone. Not just an iPhone, my iPhone, right? So when you say, am I only able to perceive through deduction? I wouldn't quite say it that way. I would say I'm as human beings, as any kind of being, we take in data through our senses, and then the mind collates that and assembles that into a concept and an experience and an idea and a picture and an identity, which we project out onto the world, into the blank screen. There's a blank screen which I projected iPhone onto, right?
Well, I take it as, this is hen,
Yeah.
and there's a me entity that's owning this hen.
Yeah.
And so the mind that perceives this hen and the mind that perceives this me entity owning this hen,
Yeah.
those two perceptions can't happen at the same time. Is that what that's what it's talking about, right? And then so how can you perceive that you exist owning this hen?
Well, you can have the
That's
thought. You can have the thought.
Was that what this?
Well, you can have the thought, I exist and this is my hand, right? And that's a linear progression of thoughts, no problem. And that's kind of restricted to you. But what if you start to talk about my phone, which is over here, right? How do I know that? I mean, I can't bite this like we were talking about last week, obviously. But I mean, what would be equivalent? Okay, I took the cover off of my phone. I took the cover off of my phone, right? While I'm focused on the cover over here, I see some stuff going on, but I'm not thinking about me and John and blah 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 blah.
Right.
I have to put it all together conceptually, just like you put together the identity of the phone conceptually.
Right. So it's comparing to ultimate reality. You're putting it together.
Any experience.
Right.
So any subject-object experience, any experience of you and the stuff outside of you, those are two separate things. To our mind, those are two separate things, and so the mind has to splice together, connect, link the interaction between you and what you're engaging with.
I'm just trying to connect this to seeing emptiness directly. So it's so this connect to intellectually understanding emptiness. So it's the same thing, intellectually understanding that there's this levy with this hand.
This was the mind.
Same.
This was the mind-only school, which got very subtle and very difficult. And the mind-only school was saying, what is an illusion, if you recall? What is an illusion? What does illusion mean? What is the nature of illusion, right? And we talked about what the definition of illusion is and what it isn't, right? And so they were saying, look, if you're saying that things don't really exist from their own side, I can't redo the whole debate because we never get to tonight's class. We can't redo all of last week's class, but the basic idea is that they're saying, look, if you're saying everything is a projection, if you're saying everything is a concept, everything is a construct, right, then it doesn't really exist. That's what the mind-only school is saying, right? They're saying, Madhyamika Prasangika, you're telling us that everything exists as a projection, as a concept, and as a construct, and it doesn't exist any other way, right? It doesn't exist from its own side, right? What we just talked about.
Right, and then they're saying that, so your perception of your mind doesn't really exist.
Well, they're saying that anything that
right,
doesn't,
including your perception.
the mind-only school is saying anything that functions truly exists. That's what they say, right? That's their kind of basic credo in a simplified fashion. So they're saying, look, your mind functions, you function, you really exist, you really are there. And so then there's the debate. The Madhyamika Prasangika say, yeah, no problem, but you're there in a certain way. You're there as a concept, as a construct, independent upon conceiving yourself a certain way, experiencing yourself a certain way, right? And on and on and on. So that was the nature of the debate. And then they got into this subtle debate about where the mind only was saying, listen, Madhyamika Prasangika, so you're telling me that you're an illusion too? You're telling me that you don't really exist? You're telling me that your mind doesn't really exist? Are you telling me that your mind is an illusion? And if you're saying that your mind is an illusion, how can an illusory mind perceive ultimate reality? So that was the nature of the debate. And then we were getting into the fine points about what does illusion mean to mind-only school, what does illusion mean to the Madhyamika Prasangika school, and then all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that, I don't know if that helps.
Okay.
We have to cook it. Yeah, we have to redo the whole class, which we need to do tonight's class. Which we've moved on, and we are on to Hinayana school. And the Hinayana, there are two schools: the listeners and the mind-only schools. And they pick a fight with Master Shantideva.
Listeners and mind only, or listeners?
No, sorry, did I say mind only?
Yeah.
Sorry, listeners and self. I'm stuck on mind only. Listeners and self-made Buddhists. Sorry, they're two Hinayanas.
Both Hinayana?
Both are Hinayana schools. So the mind only school is what kind is Mahayana, right? It's a higher way school, right? Just it's a different philosophical take on how you define things and how perception and how reality works. Okay. So you are the sum total of your karmic seeds, right? I mean, we said that we collect karma continuously, 64 karmas per, whatever that is, a second or a millisecond or whatever, finger snap. And we are the sum total of those karmic seeds. Those karmic seeds that are ripening and expressing themselves define us and create our perceptions and create our reality, right? Perception is reality. Our valid perceptions are our world, right? I perceive myself as a human being and therefore I am a human being, right? I perceive this room as, bricks and wood and whatever, and that is my valid reality. Another being could come in here and have a completely different perception, different reality, no problem. Not hard to see that an ant has a completely different perceptual experience and reality of this room, or a dog, or other beings that Buddhism say exist that we can't see. Different worlds and different realms and different realities for all of them. No problem. We think we're people. We think we're human beings because we are having certain karmas ripen to have that valid perception. And it's true. We are human beings as long as we perceive ourselves to be human beings. And at some point, we perceive ourselves dying, and we're no longer perceiving ourselves as human beings. We perceive ourselves as a different kind of being after the perception of this body and mind and life is finished, right? It's just death is a perceptual event. It's a shifting of the mind, a shifting of awareness, a shifting of understanding. So, no problem with all that. Buddhism says there are these major groups of beings, like there are animals and there are humans and there are hell realm beings and there are angelic beings, right? It's not that there's a self-existent group of beings called humans, that are somehow like, you just have to get to the right place and all these beings pop up, which is, I think, sometimes how we think of it. It's that there are major, the ways in which the nature of the karma that we collect is such that we have similar experience. When the karmas ripen, we have a similar experience. Right? All the beings who experience this room in a certain way are called human beings. All the beings who experience their body in this way, we call human beings. The beings who have karma ripen to experience themselves with fur and 4 legs, we call dogs. I don't know what they call themselves, right? But the nature of it is not that there are human beings and human beings have certain karmas. The nature of it is that we are the sum total of our karma. Every being is the sum total of its karma. And whichever karmas are ripening and going off cause that being to have a perception of itself as that kind of being. So we are humans because we have karmas ripening, which cause us to be humans, cause us to perceive ourselves as humans. And I'm not expressing it very well, but it's an important idea to understand that as long as we have collected the karmas in the past, and those karmas are currently ripening and expressing themselves to perceive ourselves as human beings, we'll be human beings, right? And so in Buddhism we say, there's 6 realms of beings, right? And it's really just a way of saying there are really 6 major groupings of karmas. If you collect this kind of karma and it ripens, you perceive yourself as an angelic being. If you collect this kind of karma and it ripens, you perceive yourself as a hell realm being. And then on and on and on, right? There are many, many, many infinite variations on that. Obviously, just as there are countless kinds of human beings, right? I mean, same is true in other realms. So, So when we're talking about ultimate reality, and we're talking about humans, and keep in mind that we're talking about the nature of perception. We're talking about what is your mind able to perceive, and how is your mind perceiving, right? If your mind were functioning differently, if your senses were functioning differently right now, you would be perceiving another realm or a completely other experience, right? If our senses and our mind were extremely pure, we'd be perceiving higher realms, right? If our senses and in our minds were functioning at a much worse level, we'd be experiencing horrible suffering perceptions and experiences, right? I mean, it's like someone whose nerves are just sending pain impulses all the time, right? Like that's all their body and mind can perceive is pain impulses, because that's how they're wired at the moment, you know? That's what their wiring is doing at the moment. So similarly at the mental level, it's like that, you know? When we have the sensory inputs, which are wonderful, and when we have the mind that's interpreting all the sensory inputs as amazing, then that is our valid experience and our valid reality, right? So, and that's what defines us as a being, and that's what defines the realm that we're in as a being. When we get to a place where we have wonderful sensory inputs and wonderful sensory capacities and wonderful mental conceptualization and ideation of all that, then we're a higher being, right? So that's really what we're talking about. Okay. Anyway, so in that context, the Hinayanas come along and they say, wait a minute, Mr. Shantidevi. They say, you're talking about ultimate reality. You're talking about putting an end to all your suffering. You're talking about becoming an Arya, right? A pure being, a higher being, right? We don't think it works that way. These Hinayana schools say that, you know, I don't think that's how it works. I don't think it's necessary to perceive emptiness and ultimate reality to achieve enlightenment. They have a different idea. So Hinayana, it's written up there. Hina means lower, and Yana means way. So, you know, are they some kind of like low-class Buddhists, right? No, Hinayana means the lower way, lower school of Buddhism. But it's not that they're some kind of dumb Buddhists or kind of uneducated Buddhists. They have brilliant ideas and phenomenal understandings, and we'd be breaking our Bodhisattva vows if we were criticizing them. But it does mean that some of their explanations are wrong, according to the highest schools of Buddhism. So the main difference between the Hinayana schools and Mahayana schools are that they're not so concerned about teaching other people how to put an end to their suffering. Their main focus is upon how to prevent themselves from suffering after they die, right? In this life and after they die. So they come to Master Shantideva and they say, look, you know, you don't have to see emptiness to get to nirvana and Buddhahood. And so Master Shantideva says, really? Well, how does that work then? You know, what do you say, Mr. Hinayana? You know, how do you say that one gets to nirvana and Buddhahood? So they give their presentation. Please say mitak, sok, chudruk. So chudruk means 16, and mitak means changing. Sok means etc. So these are 16 aspects of the so-called Four Noble Truths. Why are they so called? Why are they? I'm very tongue-tied tonight for some reason, so I'm going to confuse my words. Try to work with me, okay? Why are they so-called Noble Truths?
It's a mistranslation of the word Arya.
Yeah, noble is a bad translation that was picked up early on in the annals of Buddhism coming to the West. You know, it doesn't have anything to do with being noble, like I'm a wonderful, noble person, right? It refers to an Arya, a higher being. So, and we'll talk about it. So, from a highest school's perspective, the way it works is the way seeing ultimate reality works. The kind of chronology of events for perceiving ultimate reality, we talked about it the other class, right? What's the first thing that happens? Yeah, can you elaborate? How does one perceive dependent origination? What does one perceive when they're perceiving dependent origination?
Well, you can first see yourself labeling the shapes and colors. From there, you can then see yourself creating the whole image, or the 64 frames a second, which forms the movie that is reality.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. It's like if you're the projectionist, right? And you're back there with the machine in the movie theater, and you're looking at the film, and you're seeing all the frames, right? And you put the spool on, and then you turn it on, and it shows reality of the movie for everybody. So it's a similar idea. The perception of dependent origination is the highest perception you can have in this realm. And you're looking at something. You're looking at this, and you're not thinking there's a phone there. You go like, you actually are able to perceive yourself taking in the sense data. You say, I recognize that my eyeball can only see light and shadow. That's all it can see. A curve, roundness, the name of the color, it all comes from my mind. My eyeball is not able to perceive black. Black is a concept that my mind applies. So you have the direct perception of yourself taking all of these bits of data and assembling them into the identity. And you recognize that it's actually your mind, that a picture which is drawn in your mind, that a picture which is assembled in your mind. And so you see yourself making pictures in your mind directly for the first time in infinite lives, in your infinite past. And this is a peak experience, peak perceptual experience in this realm. To be able to say, there's nothing really there. There is no phone there. I'm just creating pictures in my mind and looking at pictures in my mind and experiencing pictures in my mind. Right? So that's the experience of dependent origination. So we have that experience of dependent origination. After that, one sits down and meditates upon that peak experience. One is withdrawn from their ordinary senses. The mind experiences ultimate reality. The mind actually is in another realm, the form realm, and experiences ultimate reality there. One then, for 20 minutes or however long it lasts, when one comes out of that experience, right, there's an experience of coming down. And then you come out of the meditation and you open your eyes. And then for the rest of the day, there are a series of profound spiritual realizations which occur, which are grouped into 16. A series of extraordinary experiences which happen either on the cushion or off the cushion throughout the day, deep spiritual realizations. In the first instant of perceiving ultimate reality, one is an Arya, a higher being, a superior being, right? Realized being. When one comes out of that experience, one has the realization of what are called the 4 Arya truths, which are mistranslated as the noble truths, right? So the 4 Arya truths are grouped into 16 different ideas. And so the 16 are grouped into 4. So the 16 realizations that one has after the direct experience of ultimate reality are grouped into 4. And the 4 Arya truths, right? You understand the 4 main ideas, the 4 big ideas are that you see and understand suffering directly for the first time, and you see and understand directly where the suffering is coming from. Right? You see directly this is what suffering is, and you see directly the causes and sources of suffering. And then you see that it's possible to put an end to all suffering, and you see directly how to put an end to all suffering. Right? So those are the 4 Arya truths. Right? The true nature of suffering and the true causes of suffering, the end of suffering and how to end suffering. So you experience those things. Right? And so inside of each of them is 4 different ideas. So the lowest schools, the Hinayana schools, they turn it around backwards. So that in the highest school, we say, look, you have a direct experience of ultimate reality. In deep meditation, mind travels to another realm. You experience this highest reality. You come out of that meditative experience, and there are 16 amazing, profound other realizations which occur. But they're follow-on from experiencing ultimate reality. So the Hinayanas turn it around and they say, no, the only thing that matters are these 16 realizations. They say that the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths are all you really need to get. If you can just understand each of these 16 things, then you can attain nirvana. And it's like, you can understand each one for like a second or two. Get a realization and an understanding of each of the 16 points, and then it's possible to attain nirvana.
So you don't get the realizations from seeing emptiness?
Yeah, from their perspective, emptiness is irrelevant. From the Hinayana perspective, emptiness is not relevant. They say it doesn't matter if you experience ultimate reality. It doesn't matter if you experience emptiness. All you got to do is experience these 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, 4A truths, and then you can reach nirvana. So then we have to talk about that. So it's just turned around. It's in essence, someone got mixed up somewhere along the way.
Having the realizations before or after seeing emptiness.
Well, they say you don't need to have the realization of emptiness at all.
It's just understanding.
Yeah. So they say, look, 16 points, study them, get them, golden, get to nirvana.
It's not kind of related to the idea of you can understand intellectually emptiness and thereby experience it even though it's not a direct perception, the same kind of idea?
Well, I mean, it's true that you can understand ultimate reality intellectually and not experience it directly in communion. That's totally true. But they're saying that it's not the point. They're saying emptiness is not the point. They're saying these 16 aspects of the 4A truths are the point. They're big on the Four Noble Truths, right? Suffering and its causes, the end of suffering and the causes. Mm-hmm. And so then you further break that down to 16, and they say, look, just dig into these 16 points and get to nirvana. I mean, I'm simplifying, obviously, but that's the thought, right?
Which does a better track record of success?
Good question. We need a tally. We need a scoreboard. We need a survey. Start to take names, right? Here. So, it's the impermanence and other great spiritual ideas. You understand these things, and you can get rid of your mental afflictions forever. Because what's nirvana?
It's the cessation of.
And any disturbance of your mind forever. You get to the state where you're never unhappy, never disturbed, never upset in the least ever again. That's attaining nirvana, right? Your mind is just blissed out and happy all the time. And so they say, if you just get these 16 things, you can pacify your mind. You can get rid of all your mental afflictions. So Master Shantideva says, wait a minute. He says, let's talk about this. He says, so you're saying that just by getting these 16 points, you can permanently put an end to all your mental afflictions? And they said, yeah. So that's where we kind of get into it, right? So Master Shantideva agrees that it is true that if you have these understandings and these realizations of impermanence and other profound spiritual ideas, that you can suppress your mental afflictions. If you understand impermanence, you won't necessarily have craving and attachment and desire while impermanence is in your mind. Right? But we have to talk about the nature of mental afflictions, and there are two kinds of mental afflictions. So please say Nungurwa. Nungurwa means manifest. These are mental afflictions which are manifest.
Can you repeat that?
Manifest?
No, what is the definition?
Manifest.
I'm sorry.
Nungurwa means manifest.
Okay.
Active. It's active in your mind. It has manifest. It is manifest. So think in terms of being angry. It's up. It's manifested in your mind. If you're angry, it's filling your mind, it's manifest in your mind, and it's there. Right? So it's possible to have mental afflictions which are up, which are triggered, which are filling the noggin. Right? So that's one kind of mental affliction. Right? So please say Bakla, Nyelwa. Bakla is seed, and Yelwa is sleeping. It means these are dormant or inactive mental afflictions, right? Like, is it possible to be over anger completely and then have somebody piss you off?
No.
No, of course not. It's contradiction. So, if it's possible for somebody to piss you off, you're not over anger completely. You have inactive seeds which are just lying around waiting to be triggered. Right? I mean, it's not possible to be triggered unless there's something there waiting to be triggered. Right? So these are the two different kinds of afflictions which are possible, right? There's a potential in your mind, there's an energy in your mind, a latency in your mind, where you can be made to be angry, or you can be made to be desirous, or jealous, or insecure, or whatever it might be, right? So Master Shantideva says to the Hinayanas, he says, look guys, there are two kinds of mental afflictions going on here, you know? There are obvious mental afflictions which are up, and which are in your mind, where you're pissed off, and you're jealous, and you're insecure, and you're depressed, and all the rest. You know, but just because you're happy right now doesn't mean that you've reached nirvana, does it? I mean, just because I'm not having any mental afflictions for 30 seconds doesn't mean that they're all gone permanently. Doesn't mean that they're done forever, right? It just means I'm having a temporary respite. I'm having an affliction break, right? It's kind of like, you should do that every day, like you have a cigarette break, you know, or a coffee break, you know, we need an affliction break, right? Every day at 2 o'clock, let's have an affliction break, right? Wouldn't that be nice, right? So, just because we're not mad right now doesn't mean that we've gotten rid of our capacity for anger, right? And all of our seeds for anger. So, I mean, the first stage of training ourselves in dealing with our mental afflictions is to try to not have them come up. I mean, that's the idea of a monastery, right? Like, if you a monastery in Vinaya, like, there are rules. The monastery has to be, like, I don't know how many miles, like 20 miles away from the nearest town. Like, it can't be around anything, so that they can't be bothered by anything or triggered by anything. You know? So that's the whole idea of, you know, monasticism and vows is like eliminate anything that could be a problem for the mind, you know? To try to keep the afflictions at bay and keep the afflictions at a lower level, right? I mean, it's a low-level remedy. To say don't get triggered is kind of a low-level remedy, but it works. You know, if you know somebody's going to piss you off, don't go around that person, right? It works, right? You know, it's not the ultimate solution, is it?
Nothing.
So, yeah. Anyway, it keeps you from collecting a lot of bad karma, you know, and it's an antidote, and it works, right? You know, I mean, we just know that, like, if I go around this person, I'm going to be so desirous, and I'm going to be, like, so, like, all over the place. I should just, like, not go around that person, right? Or whatever it is, doesn't matter, you know? Avoid seeing the person. So, stop the mental affliction. But are you stopping the mental affliction? No, you're just not triggering what's there, right? If you avoid the trigger, it didn't do anything to the underlying state. It didn't do anything to the underlying issue, the underlying things in the mind, the underlying functioning of the mind, right? It just didn't trigger it. It's like, you know, it's like before you have kids, right? It's like, I'm such a patient person. I really got this down pat. I mean, I've mastered the anger thing, you know? And you have kids, and it's just like, I told you! You know, right? It's like, just not getting triggered, you know? I mean, relationship is like that too, I suppose, you know, at some point. You know, that's why if you get married, it's just an opportunity to work on your mental afflictions on a deeper level, right? And if you have kids, it's an opportunity to work on your mental afflictions at an even deeper level. Because they're just like, I don't care what you said, I'm doing whatever I want. You know? So anyway, we won't digress too much, right? So Master Shantideva admits to the Hinayana guys that, look, if you're having a realization of impermanence, it's hard to be angry. You know, if somebody close to you just died, you're not going to be lusting after, like, the chick at the funeral, probably, right? You never know, but probably, right? You know? I mean, never mind. I could name names, but I'm just gonna. All right, but does it last? No. Look, if you're in impermanence, if somebody close to you has died, and you have this realization of impermanence, you know you've got it, right? Does it last forever? No.
Does the realization last forever, or does the
effect? Does the effect last forever? I mean, it fades slowly but surely. The longer, the farther it is into the past, the less effect it has, right? I mean, I think we've all experienced that. Something happens in our lives and it's like, God, I gotta meditate. I gotta really practice, you know? I gotta buckle down. I gotta get serious about this stuff. You know, that's good for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and then it fades off, wears off, right? Like, you know.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't.
Please,
I don't
go
mean
for
to
it.
Bring it up, but I'm going to. In you know, in the Lam Rim, when you have, there's different stages of realization with the accompanying three principal paths.
Yeah.
And with death awareness, you have contrived realizations, and then you have uncontrived realizations of impermanence, and then at a certain point you have a breakthrough realization of an uncontrived experience of impermanence. I'm wondering if Shantideva is referring to a realization of that depth, or if he's kind of talking about more of a peripheral realization, which you would be referring to,
Right.
like being at the funeral home and not
Right.
hitting on them.
So that's the issue, and you see, that's what the Hinayanists are saying. They're saying, look, these realizations or these understandings of impermanence and the rest are enough to end your mental afflictions forever, right? And Master Shantideva says, come on, not true. I mean, look, Master Shantideva has just spent the first 8 chapters of the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life teaching you these tricks, saying, look, think of them as someone who's dying. You know, think of them as, you know, blah, 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 blah. Here are all these mental tricks you can apply to not be afflicted and to behave in a virtuous way. And then, you know, we get to this 9th chapter where we're talking about ultimate reality, and he says, the only thing that can end your mental afflictions forever is the direct experience of ultimate reality. Nothing else can do it. So, yes, they can reduce your mental afflictions. Yes, they can suppress your mental afflictions. Yes, they're valid means, and yes, we should pursue them. But they are not the ultimate means. You see, the only thing which is the ultimate means is a direct experience of ultimate reality. The only thing which has the power, the capacity to put an end to the dormant mental afflictions is perceiving ultimate reality.
Sure.
So that's why he makes this distinction. He says, yeah, you can suppress active afflictions a lot through different realizations, but it's not going to root them out of your mind completely. And the only way you're going to get to nirvana is by rooting all of your afflictions out of your mind completely, permanently, forever. And nothing else is going to do that except the direct experience of ultimate reality, says Master Shantideva. And he says, look, I admit they help for a while, right? I mean, but you can't get rid of the seeds in your mind completely. He says, yes, it's an assist. Yes, it helps. Yes, it lasts for a while. But it isn't a permanent solution, right? I mean, Nagarjuna, he wrote a letter to a friend, right? And then in this book, he wrote all these tricks about how to deal with your mental afflictions and how to address your mental afflictions. And then about halfway through the book, he says, and by the way, none of it really works. You know, I mean, it's a great. You try it, it helps, but it's not the ultimate solution. It's not going to do it, right? Emptiness is it, and so that's why this idea of wisdom, you know, it's considered. I'm getting ahead of myself. I mean, it's up there in the Tibetans. I'll come back to it. So, I mean, look, if you're a good Buddhist, your mother dies, someone close to you dies. I was just at the dentist with my kids, and she said, "Oh yeah, I'm a little distracted. You know, a dear friend of mine just had a brain aneurysm. You know, and it's not looking too good." So it totally changes your perspective. It totally changes your reality. It totally changes how you relate to the world. It is effective. It does work, but sooner or later you're back to your life. You know, and it fades away. That's the downside. You know, so. So we're not looking for a temporary solution to the mental afflictions, you know. As long as we continue to collect negative karma, as long as we continue to have mental afflictions, we'll continue to have a lousy world, you know, in a corrupt reality, you know, a suffering reality. So Master Shantideva says, look, you know, the Buddha said you have to see emptiness directly, even to attain nirvana, let alone to get to Buddhahood. And then the Hinayana people say, what are you talking about? The Buddha never said that. Because we have this issue. So again, this is somewhat, you know, this is monastic Buddhism that we're doing here, right? So you have the different schools, you have the different colleges, if you will, different philosophical systems, and they're saying, I accept this textbook and I don't accept that textbook. You know, the 4th edition is great, the 3rd edition sucked, or whatever. Can't say that about the Buddha, but, you know. So Hinayana practitioners accept a certain canon of literature. Mahayana practitioners accept a different canon of literature as being the words of the Buddha.
Yeah, but the answer to the debate doesn't necessarily have to be scriptural. I mean, if the Hinayana can point to a cave and say, look, there's a Hinayana meditator in there, and he or she has been in nirvana the last 30, 40 years and hasn't experienced emptiness by their own account.
Yeah.
But neither have any manifest afflictions arisen from what you Mahayanists will claim as the stored latent seeds, then ipso facto. They haven't seen emptiness, and yes, they have permanent cessation of all afflictions to all appearances. Yeah. So what's the argument against that?
Yeah, they assert that as well. We're going to come to that.
Oh.
That's their next argument after this one. One at a time. But you're good debate. Good, you're on track. So you know, in monastic debate, first you use scriptural reference. The Buddha said, prove it through the word of the Buddha. Then you use logic, right, etc. So they're doing the word of the Buddha. So the Mahayanas say, look, the Buddha said that you have to see emptiness, you have to perceive ultimate reality to attain nirvana and Buddhahood. And so the Hinayanas say, no, he didn't. Point to the scripture, right? So what do they do then? So then the Mahayanas, they point to a scripture which is called, let's see. Okay, so it says, he pulls out something called Yum-Gido. Please say Yum-Gido.
Yum-Gido.
So this is called the Mother Sutra, which is also the perfection of wisdom. And I'm sure someone knows why the perfection of wisdom is called the Mother. I'm sure.
Gives birth.
Yeah, it gives birth to all enlightened beings. Right? The perfection of wisdom, the understanding of wisdom, is the source of all enlightened beings and gives birth to all enlightened beings. And so the perfection of wisdom scriptures are called the Mother, or the Mother Sutra. So is it a Mahayana or a Hinayana scripture?
Mahayana.
It's a Mahayana scripture. So it's kind of a sort of a maybe not the best approach, given that the Hinayanas don't accept Mahayana scriptures. They say, basically they say, look, Buddha didn't even speak the Mahayana scriptures. It's not the word of the Buddha. Why are you giving me a Mahayana scripture to prove the word of the Buddha when it wasn't even the word of the Buddha? Yeah.
Well, let's ask them which Buddha they mean.
Well, there's that too. But that's the next debate. No, I'm sorry. They reject Mahayana, right? They say those Mahayana books weren't taught by the Buddha. So then Master Shantideva, he gives them this Mahayana text to prove it, right, the Mother. And they say, we don't even accept it's true. Right? So then Master Shantideva takes this logician's approach with him, and he says, look, are your books true? Are Hinayana books true? I said, well, yeah, of course, they're spoken by the Buddha. And so, Hinayana texts have three main categories, right? Vinaya, right? And meditation, and then scriptural collection, sutra. The three collections, three baskets. Higher knowledge. So, Abhidharma mainly treats wisdom and higher knowledge. And, all right, Master Shantideva says, so why are your books true and ours aren't? Why do you think your collection of texts are true and our collection of texts aren't? And so the Hinayanas say that, we both agree that our collection of books are spoken by the Buddha, and therefore they're true. You Mahayanas say that our books are spoken by the Buddha, and we say our books are spoken by the Buddha, so we're all in agreement here. Clearly our books are valid, and yours aren't, because we don't agree that yours are true. So then Master Shantideva says, well, so if we get two Hindus together that agree that the Vedas are true, then I guess the Vedas are true. And the Vedas are accurate. So he said, just getting two groups together that agree that something is true doesn't make it true. And not having two people agree doesn't make it not true. So that's that logical argument. So then they say something like, he says, come up with something better, right? And so then they come up with something like, well, our Lama said so. You know, like our teachers told us that these texts are true, and therefore they're true, right? So they say, look, the test for a Buddhist scripture is it has to cover morality, concentration, and wisdom to be considered a valid Buddhist book. One of those topics. 3 groups of scriptures. So it says, you know, as long as the 3 groups of scriptures that we accept are covered, it's the word of the Buddha. So Master Shantideva says, look, when you were 5 years old, did you accept these Hinayana texts as the word of Buddha? He said, no, we didn't even know that they existed. We didn't know what was a Buddha. We didn't know what a Buddha was. We didn't know that these books existed. He said, exactly. So you didn't accept that these books were the word of the Buddha at a certain point, and then at a certain point, you changed your mind. And you did accept that these books were the word of the Buddha. So you could do the same thing with our books. Right? He says, I mean, at some point in your life, you just decided that they were okay and that they were the word of the Buddha, didn't you? What's the difference? He says, you know, he basically says that, look, you say you checked your books with your experience and found them to be valid. We say we checked our books with our experience and we found them to be valid. So they fit the test that the Buddha should be speaking about morality, concentration, or wisdom, the 3 trainings. So he says, so, you know, using all of those tests, then the perfection of wisdom and the Sutra of the Mother is true. So, and I think there's a broader application to our own lives, which it's good to step back and be aware of. Most of what we believe was taught to us by people who maybe didn't really get it. I mean, if I think back to my education, you know, I mean, we're formed by the age 7, 10, pick a number, you know. So, you know, our first grade teacher, who was maybe, you know, a redneck or from Kansas, or maybe hadn't read much literature, or maybe spent every day reading the Quran or the Bible or whatever, you know, they're the ones who said, this is how the world works, and this is what's true, and this is what's not true. And we were 6 years old and we said, oh yes, thank you. That's exactly right. I'll just be that way, you know, because that's what happens to you when you're a kid. You know, things are put into your head, and you're a little sponge, and you soak them up, and you take them all in, and you adapt them as yours. You know, and then they become your identity system, and your value system, and your belief system, and your way of being. And so Master Shantideva is really making a larger point here, which is most of what we think about the world and most of what we understand about the world was the result of people we met along the way who weren't necessarily qualified or trained to put that information in our head in any kind of profound spiritual way. You know, they're just your average schmo making, you know, $18 an hour at the elementary school. All due respect to teachers, you know, right? So he's saying, look, you believe in all this stuff because somebody told it to you. You know, take a step back and check it out. Just because your teacher told you it was so doesn't make it so. Just because, you know, you started believing it at a certain point in your life doesn't mean that it's true. And so, you know, we've got to check in with our own lives in that way. You know, I think it's extremely true in the West that, you know, our elementary school teachers told us what the nature of reality was and how the world worked, and, you know, what was valid morality and what wasn't valid morality. You know, I mean, it's very hard to find a good, ethical role model in our society, right? Who can say, this is the way to behave ethically, this is the way not to behave ethically, this is it. How do you find that, right? I mean, how's anyone trained in that when they're a kid? Campers.
Well, in the same spirit of taking a step back and seeing the big picture, what else was available for the teacher of a 5-year-old?
Oh, I know.
You can't give them, you know.
I'm not dissing them, no disrespect.
No, I'm saying that it's, all this is supposed to be. Okay, everything that we learn is provisional. Our capacities are partial. The
Yes.
information is partial. Our
Yes.
digestion of it is partial.
Yes.
All of it is a process of fits and starts.
Yes.
We continually learn what is sort of true and sort of not, and then unlearn it and relearn it and digest it, hopefully,
Yeah.
at an increasingly high level of understanding until finally we get to a point of discontinuity, which is exactly the argument that the Hinayanas are having with the Mahayanas, whether there is a point of discontinuity, and we can just leave the entire question behind and experience the substrate consciousness or emptiness or whatever label inadequately describes the ineffable experience that discontinuity represents. So everybody's pointing a finger, and it's a case of pots calling kettles black, and they're all right. They're all right in their criticisms of one another. So it's a medieval scholastics argument.
I wouldn't call myself medieval, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, not particularly, by the way.
I think of myself as a fairly modern man, Bruce. But isn't that the point? The point is that this is a ladder that we climb. I mean, that's really what we're doing. You know, and that's the reason for these debates and for these exercises and these, you know, in reviewing what they argued about 1,500 years ago. You know, is to say, how were they thinking about it and how were they understanding it? And can I bring my understanding up another level and up another level and up another level to the point where I can have a direct experience? And it's, as we said the other week, to have that direct experience of ultimate reality requires a lot of study, a lot of classroom hours, a lot of intellectual understanding, a lot of contemplation, and a lot of cushion time. You know, so that one has to train the mind in a way where it breaks out of its conventional way of relating to everything. You know, and this whole discussion of all these courses over the last couple of years, and this course in particular, it's critically important to shift gears and to stop seeing things as self-existent, as to stop seeing things as being there from their own side. As long as I think that there's a phone here, really and truly, from its own side, independent of my mind conceiving of it that way, I'm never going to make much progress. I don't think I'm going to make much progress towards perceiving ultimate reality. Because ultimate reality doesn't have phones. That's a convention. You know, there are no iPhones in ultimate reality. I'm sorry, Steve Jobs. Okay, right? So, you know, we have to get from this place of thinking things to thinking that I am really and truly the way I conceive of myself. I am this discrete, concrete entity in just the way I think of myself. We have to go from that, and everything is this concrete, discrete reality in the way that I conceive of it. You know, we have to go from that to like the matrixy thing, you know. I watched it the other week just to sort of refresh myself, you know, where you see like the underlying data flow, you know, he's like looking at his hands going like, it's just ones and zeros, man. It's just like, you know, it's like, right? And everybody else, it's all just ones and zeros flowing. It's so cool, I can do anything now. Yeah, but, you know, I digress. We have to move from this concrete existence, you know, it's leaden, you know, we're existing in a leaden, limited, sad way. And we have to go from that to a much more profound, expansive, projection-free way of existing, right? Construct-free way of existing. How? That's exactly what we're talking about. How do we do that? Well, first we understand that things don't exist from their own side. We understand that they are coming from my mind. My mind creates you and the experience of you. It doesn't help much to say that, I think. I think if one meditates well and deeply, one can start to have experiences of states free of conceptions. You know? Is it possible to directly experience a meditative state where you can just be free of concepts and free of mental constructs and free of mental elaborations? Yeah. Fundamental progression of one's cushion practice, right? I mean, the mind has different levels, right? Coarse minds, subtle minds, very subtle minds, extremely subtle minds, most subtle minds, you know, right? At the level of the coarse mind functioning, it's just discursive thought. I like this, I don't like that, I'm tired, I'm bored, I want to go to the movies, remember my girlfriend from 10 years ago, you know, you know. So that's, you know, one level of meditative practice where the discursive mind and the coarse mind is still active, right? As one meditates more, then the coarse levels of mind fade and are not active. And then one has a more subtle level of mind, which is now active, right? And then as one becomes more still, then that level of mind becomes inactive and is not asserting itself. And so then one is abiding in a more subtle, even more subtle level of mind, and one is perceiving at a more subtle level. So I think through the natural experience of a good daily practice and a good retreat practice, one experiences conception-free states long before one experiences ultimate reality. You know, and it's kind of a lead-in, if you will. So it's not really hard to experience mind free of concepts. I mean, I think we can do it in a lot of different ways. You know, that's not so much the question. The question is, how can we make the mind so still and so subtle and so pure that it can perceive the ultimate subtle conception-free state of ultimate reality? You know, and it's a progression. I think it's just a progression. It's not some magic thing where all of a sudden the fairy dust gets sprinkled and you can do it. You know, it's this consistent movement from crude, discursive, afflicted mind to more and more subtle and pure mind. And the purer and the more subtle the mind becomes, the more it's able to perceive along those lines. So Joseph Campbell has a great analogy, I guess you would call it. He said, look, it's like looking at a reflection of the moon on a still pond. You know, it's very clear and it's very, you can see to the bottom. You know, in very still, clear water, you can see all the way to the bottom. No disturbance, no distraction. But if the water is turbulent, all you see are little shards reflecting. You know, the moon is reflecting on the surface of the water, and the water's turbulent and a lot of choppy waves, and all you see are little shards reflecting. And it's how the mind works. You know, if the mind is turbulent, all you see are little distorted pieces of things. You know, you're not seeing what's ultimate. You're just seeing little bitty distortions. You know, which is our normal way of perceiving, is having a very turbulent, afflicted mind, which perceives everything in a fractured, twisted way. You know? So, how? By having a clean, calm, pure mind. That's the only way. You know? How to have a clean, calm, pure mind? Have a clean, calm, pure heart. You know, how to do that? Be compassionate and loving towards everyone. How to do that? Deal with your afflictions. How to do that? That's what Master Shantideva was talking about. Right? Let's take a break there. It's a good place to take a break.